I think I just discovered the secret to having a great turnout for a speech. Serve lunch. So I'm actually going to start by telling a story, only because Mike Eastman, who is one of your fellow students, did a project with me about 20 years ago. When I graduated from college at an age when you all went off to do useful and productive things with your life, i.e. go to medical school, I decided to ride my bicycle. Rode my bicycle around the world, the length and width of Africa, and from the top of North America to the bottom of South America. And Michael helped me put the organization together. When I returned from the Alaska-Argentina bike ride, I was honored. I, Dan Buettner, was invited to Cub Scout Pack 183, where I received my Webelos Award, to do a slide presentation. I'm in the back of the room ahead of time, and this young Cub Scout comes up to me, and he looks up to me and said, "Hey, mister, are you the man who did the long bicycle ride?" And I looked down at Jamie, and I saw his blue and gold tie and his freshly scrubbed face, and I remember the days when I was a Cub Scout and how I used to look up to the adults who came and spoke to us. I felt this great surge of pride. And I said, "Yes, son, I certainly am." And he looked back up at me, all starry-eyed. He said, "Boy, you must be some kind of a loser." Then he turned and ran away. So now that we've established the tone of this lecture, I'll launch in. I'm going to talk about the best practices in health and longevity from around the world. There's a lot of complications around health today. The Healthcare Reform Act and all the science that comes to bear. I'm going to be blazingly simple for 35 minutes here. We took a macro meta view of health. We found the best practices of health and wellness from around the world, and then we put them to work in people's lives. Something called the Danish Twin Study established that only about 20% of how long the average person lives is dictated by genes. The other 80% is dictated by lifestyle and environment. So the premise of Blue Zones here is if we can find parts of the world where people are living measurably longer and distill down what they do, we have a de facto formula for longevity. So I teamed up with National Geographic and the National Institutes on Aging. We spent 3 years working with demographers to find areas where you either have the highest life expectancy, the highest centenarian rate, the highest proportion of people who reach age 100, or the lowest rate of middle age mortality. The lowest, middle age mortality. In other words, where people have the best chances of living out the capacity of the human machine, which right now, on average, in America is about 92. We should be able to reach 92. Then I pulled together a world-class team of experts who could help me go to each of these places and using a variety of techniques, medical research, anthropology, epidemiology, distill down the correlations and, we believe in many cases, the causes, the common denominators that explain longevity around the world, whether you go to Asia or Europe or right here in the United States. We found 9 common denominators, and I'm going to tell you what those 9 common denominators are. But first, I'd like to take you to a few of the blue zones. The very first one we found in the highlands of Sardinia, 125 miles off the coast of Italy. In this little green bullseye here, we found a population of 42,000 people living in 17 villages where you have the highest centenarian rate in the world. People not only reaching age 100, but doing so with extraordinary vigor and vitality. Chopping wood at 105, riding their bike at 102, and beating a guy 65 years younger than them. I could have beat him in a leg wrestle. Excuse me. So this is a Bronze Age culture, actually, that had been pushed up into the highlands and been living there since about the time of Christ, and evolved a certain set of lifestyle characteristics and environmental characteristics that we believe explain longevity. This is a place that were largely shepherds. Land wasn't arable enough to grow corn and soybeans, etc. Instead, men, for the most part, shepherded their animals, a job that occasions about 6 miles of walking a day. They had to come up with a diet that was portable, and they came up with a type of unleavened bread made of durum wheat, whole durum wheat, similar to the wheat we make our whole grain pastas out of, as opposed to Wonder Bread. They ate mostly a plant-based diet. They're poor people. As you'll see in every blue zones, they're largely poorer people, debunking the myth that you need a lot of money to be healthy. 5-6 days a week, they ate almost exclusively a plant-based diet. On Sundays after church, as a celebratory meal, they ate some pork. They also had a wine we discovered to have the highest levels of polyphenol in the world. It's a type of wine known as Cannonau from the Grenache grape. One of the beauties of working with National Geographic, if you come up with a lead, such as you found the world's longevity wine, you actually have the budget to go follow that up with chemical analyses. I did plenty of trials, too. But more than what they ate and what they did, what we believe explains longevity here is an attitude. And this is largely overlooked, but hugely important. In America here, where social equity seems to peak in your mid-20s, in Sardinia here, the older you got, the more celebrated you were. There were people in their 80s, 90s, and 100s who never really retired the way we think of retirement. Incidentally, retirement is a manufactured notion, manufactured by the Social Security Administration in this country. In Sardinia, there's no word for it. So in your 90s and 100s, you're still working for city council. You're still working in city patrols. For the most part, you're living in a home of your children where you have a job either running the garden, cooking food, taking care of kids. It turns out that as soon as you put an older person in a retirement home, their life expectancy drops by 2 to 6 years, depending on the conditions. So keeping them at home and telling them that you are not only loved, but you're expected to love. Giving them a reason to get up every morning, get out of the easy chair, use their brain, use their bodies, we believe explains this extraordinary longevity more so than any wine or any cheese or any lifestyle of being a shepherd. It turns out that families that keep their aging parents nearby, not only do those aging parents live longer, but the children in those families have lower rates of disease and lower rates of mortality, an effect known as the grandmother effect. We found our second blue zone on the other side of the planet, on the archipelago in Okinawa. And if you want to see ground zero of world longevity, it's right there. That little Navi peninsula there called the Matobu Peninsula. And here you mostly see the longevity phenomena among females, but the whole population, they have what we want. Longest disability-free life expectancy in the world. They live a very long time, live very good lives, largely free of chronic disease, die very quickly, often in their sleep, and occasionally, I happen to know, after sex. Can you say sex in Iowa? 7 good years longer than the average. We won't get into that, though. 7 good years longer than the average American. 5 times as many centenarians. 1/5 the rate of breast cancer and colon cancer, big killers in America, and 1/6 the rate of cardiovascular disease. About 80% of people over 65 in this country, and in Iowa specifically, will die of one of the diseases in this risk factor cluster. And the fact that this culture is yielding these numbers suggests maybe there's some lessons there. What are they doing? Once again, you have a culture that eats mainly a plant-based diet. Not to say they don't eat some meat. They do. Lunar New Year, they slaughter the family pig, and they have a huge pork fest for 3 days. But meat is a celebratory food, once again. They have a 2,500-year-old adage condensed down in the 3 words, hara hachi bu, Confucian adage that reminds them to stop eating when their stomachs are 80% full. That's manifested in like a prayer before meals, but it's also manifested at the counter. Instead of serving food family style, where, you know, if the food is sitting in front of you, sure, I'll have another cookie. The food is pre-plated ahead of time with the right proportions and then served, and then the leftovers are put away immediately. But also they have social networks they can depend on. Lisa Berkman in Harvard found that if you're over 50 and isolated, your chance of dying in any given year triples. We live in a culture that does not assure that we have a social network. We have to make one. We have to make the effort. We have to be compassionate and interesting and charming and witty and share what we have and buy beers, etc., to have a social network. In Okinawa, it's given to you. When you're 5 years old, you are put into a social circle known as a moai. Your parents couple you with 5 or 6 other 5-year-olds. You travel through life. Things go well. You get a raise. You get that high-paying job as a doctor. You have to share it with the people in your moai. On the other hand, a child gets sick. Grandparent dies. You get divorced. You have somebody that has your back. This group of women here belong to the same moai for 97 years. 102 years old on average. They get together every night, drink sake, gossip, argue about who that hot guy liked best back in 1928. I sat with them 2 nights. The second night, one of the ladies didn't show up. The other 4 put their kimonos on and walked across the village to check on their friend. Now, at 102, if you fall down and break your hip or hit your head, as you well know, at 102, it's game over, unless you're checked on immediately. Now, in this country, unless you have long-term care insurance or you have a nurse or there's some public program to look out for you, there's nothing baked into our culture to provide this kind of care. Here in Okinawa, this idea of moai assured that everybody got free, at least rudimentary care, and never had to suffer the stress of isolation. Stress, I believe, contributes to lower life expectancies. They also have a strong sense of purpose embodied in the word ikigai, the reason for which I wake up in the morning. Yet another culture that does not even have the word retirement in their vocabulary. Instead of retiring, you are this guy's 102 years old. He's still giving karate lessons. This woman's 104, still teaching the girls of her village basket making. Good for your fingers. Where's Yogi? Yes, cognitive health. And this 97-year-old fisherman, what gets him out of the easy chair every morning, out of bed, keeps him active. He doesn't belong to a gym. He just feels it's his duty to provide fresh fish for his children and his grandchildren. So every day he's out spearing fish, and then he shows up for lunch. Looks pretty good for 97. And then Kamada-san. This is the only culture, incidentally, in the world where women are spiritual leaders. She is the Nworo, and I figure when I asked her about Ikigai, she'd say, it's my job as a spiritual intermediary. No, her Ikigai was her great-great-great-granddaughter. These 2 girls are separated in age by 101 and a half years. And when I asked her what it feels like to hold a descendant a century younger than her, she put her head back and said, "It feels like leaping into heaven." And then to America. Where do you find the longest-lived people? Well, we, in fact, spent a good bit of time here in northern Iowa, where there's a high percentage of centenarians. But it turns out the reason that is because the younger people moved to Des Moines. America's Blue Zone is bizarrely 80 miles east of L.A., San Bernardino Valley, under a cloud of smog. You take the Loma Linda exit, and the first thing you see on the right is a Del Taco, and on the left is a Wiener Hut. And you've arrived in America's Blue Zone. So what's going on here? This is actually the highest concentration of Seventh-day Adventists in the world. Adventists are conservative Methodists who distinguish themselves from other Methodists. And number one, they do their Sunday on Saturday. But number two, health and health promotions is hard-baked right into their religions, their way of evangelizing. About 60 of the country's biggest hospitals, in fact, are managed by Adventists, including Celebration near Disney World. Now, it turns out that National Institutes on Health have been following Adventists for about 30 years. The Adventist Health Study, one of the great gold standard epidemiology studies in our country. Life expectancy for Americans, women, is 90, but for Adventist women, according to this study, it's 89. And for men, the difference is even more dramatic. Adventist men live about 11 years longer. Think about that for a moment. Combine them two, we're talking an extra decade of life expectancy. And we're not talking about some obscure island in the middle of the Southeast Asia. We're talking LA. We're talking America. This, I submit to you, supremely underscores the notion that if you can optimize people's environment and lifestyle, you can deliver significantly better health outcomes without spending a ton of dough on health care. How do they do it? Well, they take this idea of Sabbath very seriously. From sunset on Friday till sunset on Saturday, no matter how busy they are, no matter what homework they're supposed to do, no matter where their kids need to be driven, for 24 hours they focus on their God. Lunchtime they focus on their social network. They have these sort of hot dish lunches, sort of a modern version of a Moai. And then, again, hardwired right in their scriptures, a nature walk on Saturday afternoon. The definition of which has evolved some in the last few decades. But nevertheless, it's the ritualistic, every week that you de-stress, every week you're building that social network, every week you're getting some physical activity. And this is not something that happens, for a year or two. You sign up for a marathon, you run a marathon, you get sick of running marathons. This is something that goes on for decades or lifetime. And that's when it starts to add up. That's when it starts to make a difference. The other aspect of Adventists is they tend to hang out with other Adventists. So you go to an Adventist party, nobody's swilling Jim Beam, nobody's smoking a bong. Not my kind of party. No, I'm just kidding. But they sort of support each other. They exchange vegetarian dishes. By the way, they eat largely plant-based diets again. They take their diet directly out of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where it talks about grains and pulses and green plants. Again, the third Blue Zone culture in a row eats mostly a plant-based diet. This is a culture that has yielded Ellsworth Wareham, 97 years old, multimillionaire. Yet when a contractor wants $6,000 to build a huge privacy fence around his house, the guy's like, for that kind of money, I'll do it myself. Multi-million. The guy's got tens of millions, but yet in the 90-degree heat, he's out shoveling cement and hauling timbers. And predictably, perhaps on the fourth day, he ends up in the operating room. But this isn't Ellsworth Wareham getting open heart surgery. This is Ellsworth Wareham at 97 doing open heart surgery. 97 years old, still does 20 open heart surgeries a month. So, you guys got a long road ahead of you. I actually brought Oprah's cameras and Dr. Oz into Ellsworth Wareham's operating room. And Dr. Oz asked Ellsworth, "What is your secret to longevity?" And he snapped back, "I don't hang out with old people." Ed Rawlings, 106 years old. He's a still working cowboy. Starts his day with a swim, and on the weekends he says he likes to put on the boards. And then my favorite, Marge Deton, wakes up at 4:30 in the morning, reads her Bible, eats her oatmeal, chases it with what she calls a prune juice shooter. I try not to let my mind go there. And then she goes down and pumps iron. Rides her bike and gets in her 1994 root beer colored Cadillac Seville, where she still volunteers for more than 7 different organizations, including the Loma Linda Senior Center, which are a bunch of 70-year-olds that she calls old folks. You don't know this about me, but I'm probably the only person you've ever met who's bicycled across the Sahara without sunscreen. But I can honestly tell you I've never been on an adventure more harrowing than riding shotgun with Marge Deton. So I summed up these 3 cultures in a cover story for National Geographic and wrote a book that became a New York Times bestseller about 2 other blue zones, 5 altogether. And both in the article and the book, we sum it up by distilling down what are the common denominators. And it turns out No matter where you go in the world, when you find a culture of longevity, you can be pretty sure the following 9 things are happening. Number one, instead of focusing on exercise, in fact, of the 250 centenarians I interviewed, almost none of them exercised. But they did live in environments that nudged them into physical activity. There wasn't a button to push for yard work, another button to push for housework, another button to push for garden work. When they wanted to go to their friend's house or to the store or to church, they walked. They tended to have gardens. You looked at their life, and it was just riddled with little landmines that nudged them into physical activity. They had the right outlook. We can't get stress out of our lives. You think that people who live in Southeast Union live stress-free lives? No. They have the same stress as we do. But they did have daily routines and strategies to shed that stress. Prayer, meditation, taking a nap, happy hour. They all work to reverse that chronically inflamed, that chronic inflammation you all know is the root of so many age-related diseases. 2 most dangerous years in your life, the year you're born and the year you retire. 3-fold spike in mortality the year you retire. These people had purpose, an ikigai, a plan de vida that sort of carried them through that mortality spike at retirement. We know that people who have strong meaning in their life live about 7 years longer than people who don't. When it came to what they consumed, most people like this one, they all, for the most part, drank. A couple glasses of wine a day, and no, you can't save up all week long and have 14 on the weekend. As Mike Eastman and I used to do. Where are you, Mike? Plant-based diet. Does that mean they never ate meat or they were militant vegans? No. But meat was a condiment or a celebratory food. I just looked at the dietary surveys of all 5 blue zones over the last century, and you see, on average, it's about 3 ounces of meat a week. That's probably ideal. Meat is a little bit like radiation. We don't know the safe minimum, but we do know that eating too much of it is bad. But more important than what they eat is what they didn't eat. And they had strategies like eating a big breakfast, pre-plating the food at the tables, smaller plates, no TV in the kitchen, that helped them consume fewer calories. We call it the 80% rule. And then about 50% of this longevity formula lie in the way they connect, keeping their aging parents nearby, investing in their spouse or their significant other. We know that's worth 4 to 6 years of life expectancy. We know it's worth 4 to 14 years of life expectancy if you belong to some faith-based community. It doesn't matter if you're Lutheran or Catholic or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist, but showing up 4 times a month. And then who we connect with. And this is the big idea. And this is what we ought to be focusing on. When it comes to longevity, if you're not doing it for decades or a lifetime, it has almost no impact on your life expectancy. I'm talking about positive behaviors. Friends tend to be long-term adventures. So taking stock on who you're spending your free time with and augmenting your social circle if necessary. If your 3 best friends are obese, there's a 150% better chance that you'll be overweight. If your friends smoke, if your friends sit on the TV and drink Mountain Dew and watch TV, guess what you're going to be doing on Tuesday night? Even happiness and loneliness are contagious. Big opportunity comes in helping people optimize their social networks because friends can last a lifetime. They often do. So I can tell people all day long, if America could adopt this, it'd be worth about 12 years of extra life expectancy. But as you know, or as you will see when you get out into the gladiator ring of the real world, you can tell people all day long what they should do. Take your medicines. Take these supplements. Show up for checkups. How do you get a population to actually adopt things, to do them? Well, National Geographic, bless its heart, go renew your subscriptions if you don't get them. They gave me what's called an Explorer grant to canvass the earth, to look at every non-infectious disease community health program in the world to find one that worked. And I found 2 astounding things. Number one, in America, there has never been one that has worked. We spent tens of millions of dollars on a heart healthy program up in Minneapolis, another one in Stanford, another one in Connecticut. When the researchers and the doctors are paying attention, people eat their veggies and do their walking. But you find over and over again, as soon as the experts leave, people revert right back to what they were doing before. Sort of the healthcare equivalent of what's called the Hawthorne effect. When you're watching people make a difference. There are two places in the world that have successfully gotten populations healthier, gotten communities healthier. One, in France, they successfully brought down childhood obesity and sustained it for 8 years. And the other one in Scandinavia, a place that had the highest rate of cardiovascular disease in the world in 1972 and have brought it down about 90%. The way they did it, and I spent almost an entire summer with these places, the way they did it was not focusing on the individual, not telling you, you have an individual responsibility to do the... No. And this is the big idea. They focused on the environment. They aggregated evidence-based ways to change people's environment. I use a very simple metaphor. That old experiment, if you throw a frog in hot water, what does it do? It jumps out. If you throw a frog in lukewarm water, you can turn that water up 1 degree at a time. That frog will become complacent and boil to death. When it comes to healthcare, the problem's not the frog. You can tell a frog all day long what to do, but the frog is just going to do what its biology tells it to do. We are evolutionarily hardwired to want calories, to want rest, to want sugar, to want fat. The opportunity is the water, focusing on the water. So based on that idea, inspired by those two projects in Europe, I created a blueprint with half a dozen colleagues. We got about $1 million worth of funding through AARP, and we launched it in America here, an emblematic city of about 20,000 people just north of here. The model that we created looked not at the individual, but at the environment. We found that the average American spends about 80% of its life within about a 20-mile life radius. So that is the water that we're trying to optimize. Now, if you look at that life radius, you see there are 4 essential components, 4 domains into our environment. There's our community. These are things that are governed by policy and built environment. Do I live in a place where it's easy to walk to the store and to my friend's house? Is it easy to smoke, or is smoking prohibited in places? Is junk food cheap or expensive? Can I market junk food to kids? All of these are sort of governed by policy and governed by local government, municipal government. Social networks. Who am I spending my time with? Habitat. Do you know there are about 55 design tweaks you can do to a school, a workplace, a home, a restaurant, and a grocery store that will constantly nudge people into a little bit better eating, a little bit fewer calories, a little bit more movement, a little bit more social interactivity. The idea here is not to look for a silver bullet, but to unleash silver buckshot. Little things that move a population 1 or 2%, relying not on any individual, but getting 30 or 40 of them going in concert. So this idea we took on the road. We auditioned 5 cities. We searched for a city who was ready and who desperately wanted us. And we picked a place just north of here called Albert Lea, Minnesota. Just north of the border. They go up 35 towards Minneapolis, right across the border on the left. 20,000 people. They desperately wanted us to come in, and we obliged. We came in first and just listened. They had a lot of things going right. We didn't want to change them, but they had some huge mistakes they were about to make. They were about to take Main Street, widen it, and raise the speed limit. We knew doing that would rip the social fabric. Parents wouldn't want their kids going downtown. Nobody wants to sit in an outdoor cafe with traffic ripping by at 50 miles an hour. So we said to them, after a pretty long audit, we said, well, instead of going ahead with this Main Street widening project, let's look at how your town is set up and see if we can make it more walkable and bikeable. And it turns out that Albert Lea was broken up into 5 4 quadrants with a downtown in the middle. All we did is find one conduit to downtown from every neighborhood. So now anybody who wanted to walk downtown could do it without having to cut through a park or a field or cut through bad traffic. Just optimizing the built environment, you can raise, this is according to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, you can raise the activity level by 30 to 40%. No gym memberships, no Ab Master, no yoga class. Just make the active option the easy option. We noticed there was a beautiful lake right touching downtown, but you couldn't get around it. So we took some of that street widening budget and we helped them put in a path, which is constantly full now. Parents walking their kids, rollerbladers, bikers, lovers walking. That place is always full, except, of course, for the lethal months in January and February. But we've just created countless hours of physical activity that goes on, that will live on and on and on, long after we leave. And then taking a page from Blue Zones, we put in 4 huge public gardens. We brought in the nutritional expert, Dr. Brian Wansink, from the Cornell Food Lab. Wansink's expertise is looking at food environments and setting up nudges and defaults. He's the guy who figured out that if you eat off a 10-inch plate, you'll consume 25% fewer calories at every sitting. We got about 50% of all the restaurants in Albert Lea to agree to make 14 or 15 small little tweaks to the way they serve people. When you sit down, does your waitress automatically give you bread, or do you have to ask for it? When you order the entree, are you automatically given fries, or are you automatically given a salad? These little defaults make a huge difference in how many calories people consume. So if you can get every restaurant to make these little tweaks, it adds up to a huge difference. And then we went into schools. And with the 9 simple policies, we were able to begin lowering the BMI of the average student by 11%. If your child goes to a school where kids cannot eat in hallways and classrooms, you cut out 8 hours of junk food eating out of their day. Because if kids are eating in hallrooms and classrooms, getting the food out of their lockers, what are they eating? It's junk food, Mountain Dew, candy bars. Then we went to the entire population. Over the course of 2 nights, I addressed about 1,500 members of the community, and I got them to take a personal pledge. They agreed to change their home and social environment in just a half a dozen little ways. We didn't ask them to get on a diet. They didn't have to pay anything for an exercise program. We did make them take a health risk assessment called the Vitality Compass, which gave them their life expectancy and their biological age. And then we just asked them to do simple things like dig a garden in your backyard. Once it's dug, you're going to be nudged to do it for the next 4 months. Let our experts come in and optimize your kitchen. You'll consume 75 fewer calories every day without thinking about it. You say, big deal, 75 calories a day? Well, over the course of a year, that's 6 pounds off your midsection. It makes a huge difference in a population. Taking a cue from Okinawa, we put signs next to people's stoves reminding them to pre-plate the food instead of giving family style. You'll eat about 30% more calories if you're sitting around bowls and bowls and bowls of food as opposed to the right amount of food on your plate and then you put the food in the refrigerator. And then taking another page from the Okinawa playbook, we created Moais. 700 people agreed to be put in groups of 5. These are all people who had a positive contagion. They wanted to get healthy. And all we did was inoculate that idea and let it spread through the population. And we know that not only do the people we infect get positively infected, their friends and their friends' friends get impacted. By the way, I'll be done at 1 o'clock on the dot. So for those of you who have to leave, I pledge to you, at 1 o'clock you'll be out of here. Or even earlier, perhaps. And then we gave everybody a purpose workshop. And we like to think we are, and people in this room are self-actualized, but you'll be shocked to know how many people's life consists of waking up early in the morning, going to work, coming home and feeding the kids, and sitting in front of the TV. So we made sure that we gave everybody a purpose workshop so that at least once in their life there was somebody to sit with them and do an internal inventory of what are you good at? What are your values? What are your gifts and where can you share that? And then we instantly connected them with volunteer organizations so that purpose could be actualized for the years or months and years after we left. So we let this run for a year. And the results, quite frankly, were amazing. USA Today did 2 cover stories on it. AARP covered it extensively. The dean of Harvard's School of Public Health, Walter Willett, sent a team out to Albert Lee, wrote about it in Newsweek, and found the results stunning. And a year later, U.S. News and World Reports came back, and lo and behold, unlike the heart healthy programs that were happening, our interventions were all still in place. Why? Because everything we did was a permanent or semi-permanent environmental change that would outlive our tenure there. The results, we had 3,400 participants, almost 25% of the population, spawned countless thousands of hours of volunteering. 51% of the large employers participated. We were able to show a drop in absenteeism. We were able to augment the number of smoke-free campuses to almost a quarter of them now. Grocery stores reported higher sales of healthy foods. We raised the life expectancy by 3 years to help people lose weight, report higher levels of well-being. And this is where the rubber hits the road. We were able to show a 40% drop in city workers' health care cost by changing the environment. The secret here, I can sum it all up, you find cities that are ready, you help organize them to get all feet walking in the same direction, you make sure the mayor, the city manager, the head of public health, the health workers, the Chamber of Commerce, and the superintendent are all on board. So you're not spending all your time lobbying. And then you bring them what we call a quiver of 105 evidence-based ways to optimize the built environment, the environment of the area. And you pick out the ones that are going to fit. They don't all fit. Maybe you get 50 or 60 of them, and then you unleash them. And you help people adopt them, but you unleash them. And then you just let the system work. I don't have to tell this audience that there's a huge healthcare problem in our country. You guys are about to preside over the worst healthcare situation in the history of the world. It will bankrupt our country. We spend about $1.6 trillion a year on preventable diseases. That is more than the market cap of Apple, Amazon, eBay, Microsoft, and Google combined in 1 year. That number is due to triple in the next 10 years. It will bankrupt us. 68% of people living in this state are either overweight or obese, and the number keeps going up. Diabetes is on the rise. Rates of age-related mortality of cancer are on the rise. And for the first time in living history, our children are expected to live shorter years than we're going to live. Is that because we're bad people? Is it because we're stupid? Our generation is somehow lesser than the generation of our parents? No. My parents love me just as much as I love my parents. The difference is the environment has changed. Raise your hand if you walked to school when you were a kid. Now raise your hand if your kids walked. 1970, 50% of American children walked to school, and we're down to 10%. It took 3 miles of physical activity, engineered it right out of their lives. Our grandparents burnt 5 times as many calories every single day on non-exercise physical activity. We're not talking about the treadmill or the Abmaster. We're talking about what they did every day. We've engineered that out with mechanical conveniences. You cannot go to rent a movie, get cough syrup, fill your tank up with gas, without being routed through a gauntlet of salty snacks, candy bars, and sugar-sweetened beverages. We all have discipline. But discipline is a muscle that fatigues, and fatigues in all of us. Every single day, 275 Marketing messages rinse over our brains. Those marketing messages tell us to buy things largely that we don't need and tell us to eat food that's not all that good for us. The processed food industry spends $4 billion a year. For every $1,100 that is spent by the processed food industry on getting us to eat their food, we spend $1 on healthy promotion. You're not going to beat that. The secret, I'll assert, is not depending on individual responsibility. Not that that's a bad thing. It's not the frog. It's the water. Long-term, evidence-based ways to optimize people's environment. And then doing that one population at a time. Thank you very much. Thanks.